Indian lawmakers, including PM Narendra Modi, have paid tribute to the country's old parliament ahead of a move to a new building. The MPs were speaking on the first day of a week-long special parliament session called by the government. Mr. Modi had inaugurated the new parliament building in May, but no business was held there till now. On Tuesday, the session will shift to the new building after an event to celebrate the old parliament's legacy. The special session is being held amid criticism from opposition leaders who claim that the government has not disclosed all the business that could come up during the week. According to the government, 8 bills have been listed for discussion during the session, but this agenda could be changed or expanded during the course of the week. Opposition leaders have questioned whether a special session was necessary to discuss these bills when MPs are set to meet later this year for the winter session of Parliament. Indian lawmakers usually meet for regular business thrice a year in Parliament: a budget session, a monsoon session, and a winter session. On Monday, Mr. Modi began the special session by commemorating the legacy of India's Parliament since 1947, when the country became independent from British rule. The government has held several events to mark the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Mr. Modi said that leaving the old parliament was an emotional moment as the building was filled with special memories and that the structure would continue to inspire future generations. The biggest achievement of this parliament is that it has kept people's faith in democracy alive, he said in a speech where he also mentioned India's successful moon landing and hosting of the G20 summit. Some opposition leaders shared their memories of the old parliament while also taking potshots at Mr. Modi's government, accusing it of not answering questions and targeting political rivals. Ahead of the special session, Mr. Modi had said that its duration may be short but that it would include historic decisions. Special sessions are not that common, according to legislative expert Chakshu Roy. The government has sometimes convened them for specific occasions, like commemorating parliamentary or national milestones. The announcement of the session last month had sparked criticism from opposition leaders, who questioned the government's secrecy over the agenda. It also sparked intense speculation, with some commentators saying that the government might call early elections or even change the country's name from India to Bharat, after a controversy erupted over a possible name change. Others have said that the government may bring in a historic bill that will reserve seats for women in state legislatures and parliament. On Monday, some opposition lawmakers protested outside parliament, asking for this bill to be introduced. But the government has not confirmed any of this yet. Last week, after weeks of criticism from the opposition, it released a tentative agenda for the session which listed 4 bills for debate, including a controversial one that will change how India's chief election commissioner is appointed. Opposition parties have objected to the bill, calling it undemocratic and saying that it will reduce the independence of the Election Commission and its officers. However, this bill was not in the list of items that the government gave to opposition leaders at an all-party meeting on Sunday. BBC News India is now on YouTube. Click here to subscribe and watch our documentaries, explainers, and features. Charanjit Singh plays football professionally, only he doesn't wear a pair of boots and run around on a pitch. The 20-year-old instead earns a living playing football computer games, including the tournaments organized by the Electronic Sports, Esports, division of football world governing body FIFA. Back in June, Mr. Singh represented India in FIFA Esports Nations Cup 2023. This was held in Saudi Arabia, and Mr. Singh says he came 64th. According to one report, this earned him $10,000, £8,000. I have no idea if I'm good or not, I just enjoy playing, he says. Mr. Singh, who is from the city of Chandigarh, in northern India, is indicative of a country that increasingly really likes computer games. Last year, there were 421 million people in India who played online games, according to a report in April by accountancy group Ernst & Young. This was up from 300 million in 2019, and the number is expected to rise to 442 million this year. The study also said that the combined revenues of online games in India were 135 billion Indian rupees, $1.6 billion, £1.30 billion in 2022, 22% higher than in 2021. And it predicted that annual growth will continue around this level. At the same time, a separate report said that the number of Indians participating in organized esports competitions had soared from 150,000 in 2021 to 600,000 in 2022. This big growth is said to have been fueled by the coronavirus lockdowns giving people more leisure time, and the increased availability of affordable smartphones and cheap internet data packs. 90% of Indian gamers use their phones rather than a computer or games console. While only an estimated 20% of online games played in India are currently made by Indian gaming firms, the homegrown sector has been growing quickly in recent years. And there are now more than 900 Indian gaming startups. Yet while all had been looking good, shockwaves were sent through the industry back in July when the government announced that it was inducing a new 28% tax on online gaming. Such was the vagueness of the wording that the fear was that it could affect all Indian gaming firms. However, New Delhi subsequently clarified that the tax, which starts next month, will only apply to so-called iGaming. These are gambling sites, such as online casinos, or real money games in which the players have to pay to enter, and then compete to win prize money, such as some fantasy cricket competitions. The tax does not apply to esports competitions, which are classified as a genuine sport. And while such competitions offer prize funds, you do not have to pay to take part. The prize money instead is covered by sponsorship and people paying to watch the games. Nor does the new tax affect casual gaming, such as games in which the user may have to pay to participate, or then make in-app purchases to be able to continue. This is because these games do not offer any prize funds. This GST is neither applicable nor will it have any impact on the video gaming industry or the esports industry, says Lokesh Suji, director of the Esports Federation of India. Esports has been officially recognized as a sport by the government, which finally distinguishes it from iGaming. It will be taxed in the way that it has always been. Mr. Suji adds, "We think the prospects of esports is very bright, especially in the years ahead where we're expecting more corporate support for our young players. And the primary objective of 400 million Indian video gamers and 3 billion gamers worldwide is purely entertainment, and not financial gains or making money." As for the firms that are affected by the new tax, in terms of collective revenues, they are currently 3 times larger than the esports and casual gaming sectors. Revenues for iGaming totaled 104 billion Indian rupees last year, compared with a combined 31 billion rupees for esports and casual gaming. Deepak Manapoli is chief executive of OpenPlay, an Indian gaming firm that will be affected by the new tax. His games charge users to play them, in return for offering prize money. The change will render many businesses unviable, and potentially lead to players with cash reserves or a healthy, profitable track record, leading the show. Companies will have to rethink the unit economics and business models to ensure that player retention and profitability are still achievable in this new normal. Meanwhile, some analysts say that haphazard regulation remains a problem, as does the fact that rules can differ across Indian states. Anusha Ganapati is a Chennai-based data analyst, whose own passion for gaming began as a teenager. She says that India's homegrown games producers need to make more games that appeal to women and families, rather than more multiplayer, shooting games. Currently, women represent 40% of India's gamers. Creating a game is an art, like making a movie, she says. Ms. Ganapati, who reviews games for the New Indian Express newspaper, adds, "What the industry really needs now are more nuanced games, with rich storylines that would appeal to everyone." That's exactly what Morvi Sharma is trying to do. She is co-founder of Indian games developer Big Fat Phoenix. Out of their 12 employees, 8 are women. The team is currently designing what it says are more thoughtful games for children aged 8 to 12. "We create a world with diverse characters, using classic adventure storytelling," says Ms. Sharma. "At every twist and turn in the plot, the player must make choices, but there's no right or wrong answer. The outcome often allows children to think about the consequences of their choices." The Indian government has accused X Corp, formerly known as Twitter, of being a habitual non-complaint platform in a recent court filing. X Corp does not follow the law of the land, the government said, adding that this lowered the authority of the law, judiciary, and executive. The document, accessed by the BBC, was filed by the government in response to an appeal by X in a court in the South Indian state of Karnataka. X has not commented on the filing. The Indian government's war with Twitter. X is appealing against a recent order of the High Court which dismissed its challenge to several government orders to block certain accounts and posts. The court had also imposed a fine of 5 rupees, $60,208, £48,450, on X for not complying with several such orders for over a year. It asked the company to deposit half of the penalty, that is 2.5 rupees, and stayed the rest until further orders. Responding to X's appeal, in a court filing on August 24, the government argued that the court should reject the company's demands. Details around the filing became public when Reuters news agency first reported the story earlier this week. In the filing, the government said all of its blocking orders were given after following legal processes and in the interest of India's sovereignty and security. In several instances, the government said X either did not follow blocking orders for a long period or unblocked accounts and tweets for reasons unknown after blocking them. This was deliberate non-compliance and an abetment to offenses of publishing prohibited content, according to the government. It also argued that by filing the petition, X has tried to exert pressure upon the government while not complying with its orders. The government also clarified that while there are millions of users in India and millions of tweets are posted by Indians, the government is not seeking blocking every tweet. India has been increasingly asking X to block content. In 2022, it blocked 3,417 Twitter URLs, whereas in 2014, only 8 URLs were blocked. In June, former CEO Jack Dorsey alleged that the government had requested removal of several tweets and accounts linked to the farmers' protest in 2020. It was also asked to censor journalists critical of the government, he said. Mr. Dorsey alleged that the Indian government had threatened to shut the platform and raid employees' houses in the country. The government denied these allegations and accused the company of violating local laws. Former CEO Jack Dorsey alleged that the government had requested removal of several posts and accounts linked to the farmers' protest in 2020. X and the government have been at loggerheads for the past few years. The government has said the firm risked losing its intermediary status and safe harbor protection given in law. These protections apply to platforms such as Facebook and X that host user-generated content and safeguard them from liability for what users post. Experts say that losing this safeguard would be a death knell for any social media company to operate in India. The government pointed this out to the court in its latest submissions. For instance, it said that X had to mandatorily appoint a resident grievance officer under Indian laws, which it did not do until a court remarked that this non-compliance could attract penalty. Habitually, the appellant platform X ensures compliance only after the court warns it of action/consequences for non-compliance, the government said in its affidavit. Twitter fine sparks India free speech fears. X has argued that the government's orders to block several accounts relating to widespread farmers' protest were not consistent with Indian law and against X's, then Twitter, principle of protecting free speech. The government noted that X's compliance rates with government requests have been significantly low, prompting the government to issue show cause notice to the company. In another instance, the government pointed out that the company complied with the takedown order only when it became a part of court proceedings. The instances cited by the government took place before Twitter was acquired by billionaire Elon Musk in 2022 and renamed as X. The government reiterated that compliance with Indian laws cannot be seen as an option or hurdle to business, and if the company did not comply, it could risk losing protection and attract penal action. It further cautioned that platforms cannot take the role of arbitrator/regulator of online content and define what free speech is. The instances cited by the government took place before X was acquired by billionaire Elon Musk in 2022. Under Musk's leadership, the company has complied with takedown orders. After a meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the US, Mr. Musk said that the company had to mandatorily obey local government laws or it would risk getting shut. This is the first case of a social media company suing the Indian government over its takedown orders, which makes its final outcome significant. Rights activists have criticized the government's content blocking orders for being vague and opaque. The court's verdict in this case could set the standard for the ambit of a user's free speech on the internet in India. BBC News India is now on YouTube. Click here to subscribe and watch our documentaries, explainers, and features. Breaking news. Nipah, India's Kerala state tests hundreds after fifth case. The Nipah virus is a zoonotic disease that can be transmitted from some animals to humans. Schools and offices have been shut in some parts of the southern Indian state of Kerala after 5 cases of the rare Nipah virus were confirmed. 2 people have died so far, while 3 others, including a child, are being treated in hospital. Authorities said on Wednesday that they have tested 706 people, including 153 health workers, to check the spread of the virus. They are awaiting results. This is the 4th Nipah outbreak in Kerala since 2018. All the cases have been reported in Kozhikode district in northern Kerala. One of the deaths occurred earlier this month, while the other took place on August 30th. The state's chief minister, Pinarayi Vijayan, has asked people to avoid public gatherings in Kozhikode for the next 10 days. He said his government was taking the deaths very seriously and asked people to exercise caution by wearing face masks and visit hospitals only for emergencies. But he added that there was no reason to panic as people who were in contact with those who had died were undergoing treatment. The Nipah virus infection is a zoonotic illness transmitted from animals like pigs and fruit bats to humans, according to the World Health Organization. It can also be transmitted through contaminated food and through contact with an infected person. Deadly Nipah virus claims victims in India. Hero nurse who died battling Nipah. People who contract the virus sometimes show no noticeable symptoms, while others show signs of acute respiratory problems. In severe cases, a Nipah infection can result in fetal encephalitis, a serious condition that affects the brain. The mortality rate among those who contract the virus is high as there is no medicine or vaccine available to treat the infection. Treatment is limited to managing symptoms and supportive care. India's Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia said on Tuesday that the federal government had sent a team of experts to Kerala to assess the situation and assist the state government. The state's health minister Veena George said on Wednesday that tests had shown that the virus strain in the current outbreak was the same as the one found in Bangladesh earlier. Public movement has been restricted in parts of the state to contain the medical crisis, she said, according to Reuters. She also said that teams from the National Institute of Virology would set up a mobile lab at Kozhikode Medical College to test for the virus and carry out surveys on bats. The state government has set up a control room in Kozhikode to monitor the situation, and health workers have been instructed to follow infection control protocols. Kozhikode reported its first and worst Nipah outbreak in 2018 when 17 of the 18 confirmed cases died. In 2019, one case was reported in Ernakulam district and the patient recovered. But in 2021, a 12-year-old infected boy in Kathamangalam village died. An investigation published by Reuters in May found that Kerala, which is a tropical state and is witnessing rapid urbanization and rapid tree loss, created ideal conditions for a virus like Nipah to emerge. Experts say that due to habitat loss, animals are living in closer proximity to humans, and this helps the virus to jump from animals to humans. Breaking news. Manu Mainsar, cow vigilante wanted for violence, arrested from Haryana. Police in the North Indian state of Haryana have arrested a wanted cow vigilante accused of being at the center of the deadly religious violence that broke out there last month. Mohit Yadav, popularly known as Manu Mainsar, is accused of instigating violence in Na district, in which 6 people died and scores were injured. He is also a prime suspect in the murder in February of 2 Muslim men in Rajasthan state. He denies all the charges against him. Mr. Mainsar was caught in Haryana on Tuesday. The state's additional Director General of Police Mamta Singh confirmed his arrest to the Times of India newspaper. It was not immediately clear in which case has Mr. Mainsar been arrested, but police said they had charged him for uploading objectionable and inflammatory posts under a fictitious name on social media, reports the Indian Express. At least 6 people, including a Muslim cleric, died and dozens of others were injured as mobs of Hindu and Muslim men clashed in Nuh last month. Police said violence broke out after a religious procession by Hindu nationalist groups Bajrang Dal and Vishwa Hindu Parishad (VHP) was pelted with stones. Indian media reports said the processionists had raised provocative religious slogans. The wanted Indian cow vigilante who's at large online. India victims count losses after deadly clashes. Mr. Mainsar's name came up in the violence after residents in Nuh and several Muslim politicians said that a video by him, released just 2 days before the procession, had provoked the violence. It showed him appealing to Hindus to participate in large numbers in the procession. A member of the hardline Hindu group Bajrang Dal, Mr. Mainsar is also a member of the Haryana government's Cow Protection Task Force and the head of the Cow Protection Unit of Bajrang Dal in Nuh. In the past, he has said that his true calling is to protect Hinduism and cows, an animal that many Hindus consider sacred. Since the murders in February, police had said that Mr. Mainsar had been absconding even though he continued to post new videos regularly on social media. After the clashes in Nuh, he also gave several interviews to Indian TV channels where he denied any role in the violence. Breaking news. China says Delhi declaration sent a positive signal. China has praised a joint declaration by G20 leaders in Delhi, saying it has sent a positive signal to the world. The world's biggest economies formally adopted the joint declaration at the G20 summit in India, without a single dissenting note, on Sunday. China said the statement reflected its views and showed that the G20 was working together to tackle global challenges and promote development. This is the first time that Beijing has commented on the declaration. Several other countries, including the UK and the US, have praised the joint statement, which avoids condemning Russia, a key strategic ally of China, for its war against Ukraine. Russia too has hailed the declaration as a milestone. But Ukraine, which was not represented at the summit, has expressed its disappointment, saying the declaration was nothing to be proud of. How Russia and West agreed on Ukraine G20 language. Russia hails unexpected G20 milestone as Ukraine fumes. China's delegation at the summit was led by Premier Li Qiang after President Xi Jinping skipped the meeting. Relations between China and India remain frosty over a border dispute that led to a clash 3 years ago in which 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers were killed. In a press conference on Monday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said that China had always supported the G20 and believed that its members should stand in solidarity and cooperate on global issues. She was responding to a question by the China News Service about what Beijing thought of the summit and its outcomes. The summit adopted a leaders' declaration, which reflects China's proposition and states that the G20 would act in concrete ways through partnerships, sending a positive signal of the G20 working together to tackle global challenges and promote world economic recovery and global development, Ms. Ning said. She added that China had played a constructive role and supported the summit in attaching importance to the concerns of developing countries to reach fruitful outcomes. The joint declaration was formally adopted on the last day of the summit on Sunday. The joint declaration issued in Delhi uses more watered-down language compared with what was used in Bali last year to criticize Russia's actions in Ukraine. In Bali, most G20 members had deplored in the strongest terms the aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. In contrast, the Delhi Declaration does not directly name Russia and talks about the human suffering and negative added impacts of the war in Ukraine with regard to global food and energy security. Biden says raised human rights in India with Modi. It calls on states to refrain from the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition, which could be seen as directed at Russia, but also notes different views and assessments of the situation. At Monday's press conference, Ms. Ning was asked whether China supported the lack of direct criticism in the declaration and whether it thought that the softer language would help in ending the conflict in Ukraine. She responded saying that China's position on the Ukraine issue was consistent and clear and that the declaration reflected the common understanding of all members. The Delhi summit reaffirms that the G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation, not a platform to resolve geopolitical and security issues, Ms. Ning added. China would stay committed to promoting peace talks and work together with the international community for the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis, she said. Breaking news. Laments war in Ukraine but avoids blaming Russia. The G20 summit in India has agreed on a joint declaration, including a statement on the war in Ukraine. On the first of their two-day meeting, G20 leaders denounced the use of force for territorial gain but stopped short of directly criticizing Russia. The Ukrainian government said the statement was nothing to be proud of. The summit in Delhi also discussed a number of global issues, including climate change and the debt burden of developing countries. But it was a day of unexpectedly big headlines at the G20 summit. Few expected a joint declaration, not least on the first day of the summit given the sharp divisions in the group over the war in Ukraine. But Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that the group had reached consensus on the declaration. A strong indication that last-minute negotiations were ongoing came in an earlier draft of the declaration accessed by the BBC on Friday. It showed the paragraph on Ukraine was left blank. The sticking point was the Ukraine war, as it was during the Bali summit last year. The Delhi declaration appears designed to allow both the West and Russia to find positives. But in the process, it has used language that is not as strong in its condemnation of Moscow as it was in Bali last year. In Bali, the members deplored in the strongest terms the aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, although it noted that there were other views and different assessments of the situation and sanctions. The Delhi Declaration does not directly criticize Russia for the war. But it does talk about the human suffering and negative added impacts of the war in Ukraine with regard to global food and energy security. It also repeated the acknowledgement of different views and assessments. Importantly, the declaration specifies the war in Ukraine rather than the war against Ukraine. This choice of words could have increased the likelihood of Russia endorsing of the declaration. Ukraine, which took part in the Bali summit, was not invited this year, and its response to the declaration has been critical. In terms of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, G20 has nothing to be proud of, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry tweeted. It's hard for Kyiv to see the dropping of any reference to Russian aggression as anything but a sign that its Western backers are losing the argument with the global South over how to characterize the war. The other big news came when Mr. Modi formally invited the African Union, AU, to become a permanent member of the G20. Delhi prioritized elevating the voices of these nations as the foundation of its presidency, and in the near future, it is poised to reap the rewards of this strategic choice as it vies with China for influence across Asia and Africa. The decision is also good news for Africa, as the continent of 1.4 billion people will now have wider representation on a global forum like the G20. Climate change was another hotly discussed topic. At the ministerial level meetings in the run-up to the summit, there had been no agreement on the issue. But now officials say they have reached 100% consensus. There has been evident give and take on climate in the declaration. It says the G20 countries will pursue and encourage efforts to triple renewable energy capacity globally through existing targets and policies. G20 accounts for more than 75% of greenhouse gas emissions. Developing countries had in the past resisted increasing renewable energy targets, phasing down fossil fuels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions from developed nations. On greenhouse emissions peaking, the point after which emissions will need to drop, developing nations have been able to buy time. The declaration says that timeframes for peaking may be shaped by sustainable development, poverty eradication needs, equity, and in line with different national circumstances. Experts have also emphasized the importance of the Green Development Pact, a plan to tackle the environmental crisis through global cooperation over the next decade. G20 countries have also pledged to work together to enable low-cost financing for developing countries to support their transitions to low emissions. Pramit Pal Chowdhury, South Asia practice head of Eurasia Group, said India had done reasonably well on green finance. Green finance now largely goes from rich countries to other rich countries. Private capital is central to this financing. Not even emerging economies get it. India has been pushing to change that. At the heart of it is to get multilateral development banks to begin the process of de-risking private capital flows in the green space, he said. Then there is the growing concern over debt. The World Bank has calculated that the world's poorest nations are burdened with an annual debt service of over $60 billion to bilateral creditors, which escalates the risk of defaults. Two-thirds of this debt is owed to China. The group has said it wants to help these countries manage their debt burden. The Delhi Declaration has committed to address debt vulnerabilities in developing countries. Additional reporting by Navan Singh Khadka in Delhi and BBC diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams in Kiev. Breaking news. India's solar mission sends first photos on way to Sun. The Indian Space Agency ISRO has shared the first images sent by the country's solar observation mission as it makes its way towards the Sun. Aditya L1 lifted off on Saturday and is on a journey that will take it 1.5 million kilometers, 932,000 miles from the Earth, 1% of the Earth-Sun distance. It will take 4 months to reach its destination, ISRO says. India's maiden solar mission came just days after the country became the first to land near the Moon's south pole. On Thursday morning, ISRO shared 2 photographs taken on September 4 by a camera mounted on Aditya L1. One of the images shows the Earth and the Moon in one frame. While the Earth looms large, the Moon is a tiny speck in the distance. The second photograph is a selfie that shows 2 of the 7 scientific instruments the solar mission is carrying. India's first space-based mission to study the solar system's biggest object is named after Surya, the Hindu god of sun, who is also known as Aditya. India launches its first mission to observe the Sun. India makes historic landing near Moon's south pole. What has India's rover been up to on the Moon? And L1 stands for Lagrange Point 1, the exact place between the Sun and Earth where the Indian spacecraft is heading. According to the European Space Agency, a Lagrange point is a spot where the gravitational forces of 2 large objects such as the Sun and the Earth cancel each other out, allowing a spacecraft to hover. Once Aditya L1 reaches this parking spot, it would be able to orbit the Sun at the same rate as the Earth. This means the satellite will require very little fuel to operate. Since its launch on Saturday, Aditya L1 has already completed 2 maneuvers around the Earth. After going around the Earth 3 more times, it will be launched towards L1. From this vantage position, it will be able to watch the Sun constantly and carry out scientific studies. ISRO has not said how much the mission would cost, but reports in the Indian press put it at 3.78 billion rupees, $46 million, £36 million. The orbiter carries 7 scientific instruments that will observe and study the solar corona, the outermost layer, the photosphere, the Sun's surface or the part we see from the Earth, and the chromosphere, a thin layer of plasma that lies between the photosphere and the corona. The studies will help scientists understand solar activity, such as the solar wind and solar flares, and their effect on Earth and near-space weather in real time. Scientists say Aditya will help us better understand the star on which our lives depend. Solar Orbiter, Sun mission blasts off. Probe makes historic pass through Sun's atmosphere. If Aditya L1 is successful, India will join the select group of countries that are already studying the Sun. U.S. Space Agency NASA has been watching the Sun since the 1960s. Japan launched its first mission in 1981 to study solar flares, and the European Space Agency, ESA, has been observing the Sun since the 1990s. In February 2020, NASA and ESA jointly launched a solar orbiter that is studying the Sun from close quarters and gathering data that, scientists say, will help understand what drives its dynamic behavior. And in 2021, NASA's newest spacecraft Parker Solar Probe made history by becoming the first to fly through the corona, the outer atmosphere of the Sun. Breaking news. Kumbh Mela, worry at antibiotics overuse at India's Kumbh Mela. What does the biggest gathering of humanity on Earth have to do with antibiotics? Quite a bit, evidently. Researchers from US-based institutes, supported by Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute at Harvard University and UNICEF, have found that clinics at India's Kumbh Mela, a Hindu festival and the world's largest religious gathering, have prescribed an excessive amount of antibiotics to the tens of thousands of pilgrims, primarily arriving with respiratory tract infections. The more antibiotics are used, the higher the risk of developing what doctors refer to as antimicrobial resistance. This occurs when bacteria change over time and become resistant to drugs designed to combat and treat infections they cause. Consequently, doctors face a surge in antibiotic-resistant superbug infections. India facing a pandemic of resistant superbugs. The World Health Organization, WHO, says this poses a major global threat to public health. Such resistance directly caused 1.27 million deaths worldwide in 2019, according to The Lancet, a medical journal. The toll is projected to rise to 10 million deaths per year by 2050, says the WHO. Antibiotics, which are considered to be the first line of defense against severe infections, did not work on most of these cases. India has the highest rate of human antibiotic use in the world. Antibiotic-resistant neonatal infections alone are responsible for the deaths of nearly 60,000 newborns each year. Researchers say use of antibiotics was exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. A health worker collects a nasal swab sample from a Hindu devotee to test for the COVID-19 coronavirus during the ongoing religious Kumbh Mela festival in Haridwar on April 12, 2021. Image source: Getty Images. Image caption: a health worker collects a nasal swab sample from a devotee during the Kumbh Mela in Haridwar in 2021. The weeks-long Kumbh Mela occurs in 4 Indian cities. The pilgrims take a holy dip in the river waters on the banks of the cities where the festival is held. The US-based researchers gathered data from some 70,000 patients who turned up at more than 40 clinics at 2 editions of the festival in 2013 and 2015 held in the cities of Prayagraj, also known as Allahabad and Nashik. More than 100 million pilgrims attended the 2 festivals. In Prayagraj in 2013, the patients had a median age of 46 years and most of them were men. Their common symptoms included fever, cough, runny nose, muscle pain, and diarrhea. Concerns over superbug among India COVID patients. Researchers found that more than a third of patients at the clinics were prescribed antibiotics. In Prayagraj, nearly 69% of the patients reporting upper respiratory tract infections received antibiotics at the free state-run clinics at the festival site. This is an alarmingly high rate, given that the vast majority of upper respiratory tract infections are viral in nature, the researchers say in a recently published paper. An Indian patient holds their daily tuberculosis (TB) medication in the palm of their hand in a slum in Delhi, India. Image source: Getty Images. Image caption: broad-spectrum antibiotics comprise 75% of all prescriptions issued in India's hospitals. Researchers found that entering a clinic at the Kumbh Mela for any reason carried a 1 in 3 likelihood of walking out with a prescription for antibiotics. If you sought help for a runny nose, the probability increased to 2 in 3. When antibiotics were prescribed, there appeared to be little rhyme or reason to guide their selection, the researchers said. Their findings align with earlier estimates of antibiotic prescription rates in India, which typically range from 39% to 66% in outpatient settings. The researchers conceded that doctors at the Kumbh Mela's crowded clinics faced significant challenges, including high patient volumes, limited time, and a lack of comprehensive patient diagnostic information. Drug-resistant infections killing millions study. Each clinic sees hundreds of patients a day. Doctor-patient encounters are cursory and patients expect to be prescribed medicines for their ailments. Doctors spend less than 3 minutes on average with each patient, often prescribing antibiotics without examining the patient. The choice and dosage of antibiotics appeared arbitrary. Official protocols allowed a 3-day supply of antibiotics along with a recommendation for a follow-up visit. However, researchers observed that, with a few exceptions, the vast majority of pilgrims only made a day trip to the festival and returned home. The researchers have recommended a number of measures to cut back prescription of antibiotics in the upcoming festivals. They say that most people who turn up at the clinics do not need the attention of a physician. So, they recommend that mid-level health providers, medical students, and community health workers identify patients and implement triage. Fewer patients would reduce fatigue among the doctors. The clinics should be beefed up with adequate diagnostics such as laboratory or radiology services. Lack of diagnostics, they believe, could lead to overprescription of antibiotics. Also, doctors needed to be educated more in antibiotic use, and the policy of providing a 3-day antibiotic dose should be re-examined. Public health preparedness and response seems to be marked by a string of missed opportunities, said Sachit Balsari, one of the researchers and an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Harvard Medical School. India HIV patients in drug shortage pain. The 2013 festival in Prayagraj was one of the first mass gatherings to have cloud-based, near-real-time disease surveillance. The Nashik edition in 2015 replaced paper-based records with digital tablets, laying the foundation for continuous epidemiological surveillance. In both instances, there was little institutional memory that could either expand the intervention to all primary clinics or even leverage it during the coronavirus pandemic, Professor Balsari told me. He said the 2025 festival in Prayagraj could lay the foundation for functional digital health infrastructure that does 3 simple tasks: identify the diseases in the city based on clinical, laboratory, and drug utilization and sewage data. Experts believe India needs to strengthen regulations around prescribing antibiotics. And the world's largest gathering of humanity would be a good starting point. Chandrayaan-3, ISRO puts India's moonlander and rover in sleep mode. India's lunar lander and rover have been put to bed as the sun begins to set on the moon, the country's space research agency ISRO has said. They have been put in sleep mode and will fall asleep next to each other once the solar power is depleted and the battery is drained, it said. ISRO added that it hoped they would reawaken around September 22 when the next lunar day starts. The lander and rover need sunlight to charge their batteries and function. The Vikram lander, carrying a rover called Pragyan in its belly, touched down on the moon's little explored south pole on August 23. With that, India became the first country to land near the lunar south pole. It also joined an elite club of countries to achieve a soft landing on the moon, after the US, the former Soviet Union, and China. The Indian Space Agency has been providing regular updates on the lander and the rover's movements and findings and sharing images taken by them. In its latest update on Monday morning, ISRO said Vikram had to soft landed on the moon again. After the Chandrayaan-3 mission's lander was commanded to fire its engines, it rose up by about 40 centimeters, 16 inches, and landed at a distance of 30 to 40 centimeters, ISRO said. This successful hop experiment means the spacecraft could be used in future to bring samples back to the Earth or for human missions, it added. India makes historic landing near Moon's south pole. What has India's rover been up to on the moon? Chandrayaan-3's landing had been carefully planned to coincide with the start of a lunar day, which equals a little over 4 weeks on Earth. ISRO had said this would allow the lander and the rover 14 days of sunlight to charge their batteries and work. It has now said that both have completed all their assignments. Initially, ISRO had said that once night fell, which also equals 2 weeks on Earth, the lander and the rover would stop working. But scientists say it is possible that they will come back to life when the next lunar day starts. For instance, China's Chang'e 4 lander and Yutu-2 rover woke up several times with the sunrise. So, hoping that Vikram and Pragyan would also wake up when a new day breaks, ISRO officials have prepared them for the night. Their batteries have been fully charged, all their scientific instruments have been turned off, and they are now safely parked in sleep mode. Former ISRO chief Kiran Kumar told the BBC that nightfall may still be a couple of days away, but the lander and, especially, the rover had to be readied now. Sunlight falls on a particular spot on the surface depending on its location, and the sun goes down in orientation near the pole sooner, which means that the lander and the rover would not get sunlight for long. The rover, he explained, may be at a particular disadvantage as it is small and can be stuck in the shadows in the South Pole region, which has lots of craters with elevated rims that can block out sunlight. And the evening sun going down can lengthen these shadows further, which can put the rover in the dark region. The lander and the rover have been prepped for when the day breaks again.
so they are parked in the right spot and with right solar orientation. When the sun rises next, the solar panels will face in its direction so they are able to absorb radiation and generate power and feed the system to bring it back to life, he said. A successful awakening, however, is not a given, Mr. Kumar says. We are hopeful, but you can never tell. Their batteries are not designed to operate or for storage in the temperatures that can go down to -200°C to -250°C. ISRO has also tried to temper expectations. The battery is fully charged. The solar panel is oriented to receive the light at the next sunrise. The receiver is kept on. Hoping for a successful awakening for another set of assignments, it posted on X, formerly called Twitter. Else, it will forever stay there as India's lunar ambassador. Wrong number couple fight India deportation. In 2011, Gulzar Khan from Pakistan entered India illegally, married his lover and hid his real identity from her for the next 8 years, until he was arrested. Now he is waiting to hear if he will be deported back to Pakistan. Successful cross-border love stories between Indians and Pakistanis are rare. Relations are tense between the neighbors, who have fought 3 wars since they became independent nations in 1947. This makes it hard for people to get visas to travel to see each other. Several Indians and Pakistanis have landed in trouble after illegally crossing the border for love. In recent years, many couples whose stories received media attention have attributed their meeting to the internet. India-Pakistan online love story that ended in jail. In the case of Gulzar Khan and Daulat Bai, it started with a wrong number. Mr. Khan is from Sialkot region in Pakistan's Punjab province. There is a Punjab state in India as well, as the region was divided during partition in 1947. Ms. Bai is from the southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. Mr. Khan, who was working as a painter in Saudi Arabia, says he was trying to call a former colleague in India in 2009. When he didn't get through, he tried changing a digit here and there, thinking he might have jotted down a wrong number. One of those random numbers connected him with me, Ms. Bai says. She was a little apprehensive about talking to a stranger, she says. But he persisted. Mr. Khan says he did tell Ms. Bai on the first call that he was from Punjab, but that he didn't clarify that he meant the one in Pakistan. He also did not reveal that he was a Christian 4 years, even after their marriage. Ms. Bai assumed he was a Muslim like her. A barbed wire fence is pictured at the India-Pakistan border in Ardpora, southwest of Jammu, on October 3, 2016. Image source, Getty Images. Image caption. Successful cross-border love stories between Indians and Pakistanis are rare. Over the next 2 years, they spoke regularly on the phone. Ms. Bai, who was a widow with a child, says her relatives and neighbors would taunt her for talking to him. I used to tell him that it's better that I die, she says. But he promised to come and marry her. Mr. Khan claims that he made several unsuccessful attempts to get a valid visa from the Indian embassy in Saudi Arabia. Finally, he decided to impersonate an Indian citizen. I told authorities that I lost my passport, that I was an Indian and wanted to return to India, he says, and showed them an identity card which had a black and white photo of an Indian man who looked similar to him. He was detained and issued an emergency certificate, after which he was deported to India, he says. The BBC has contacted the Indian embassy in Saudi Arabia for comment. Mr. Khan arrived in India's Hyderabad city in January 2011 and within weeks, the couple married and moved to Ms. Bai's village in Nandiyal district in Andhra Pradesh. Upon his arrival, the local police questioned him but no case was registered. For the next 8 years, the two lived together and had 4 more children, with Mr. Khan making a living as a painter. He says he applied for and got an Aadhaar biometric card and other identity documents. Mr. Khan says he completely cut ties with his family in Pakistan during this time. His uncle even visited Saudi Arabia to find out what happened to him. We thought he may have had an accident, his sister Sheila Lal, who lives in the city of Rawalpindi in Pakistan, told BBC Urdu. As I lived with my new family, I started considering myself an Indian, Mr. Khan says.
But soon, he says, memories of home returned and he decided to visit Pakistan again. In 2019, he was arrested at a railway station in the neighboring Indian state of Telangana while trying to leave India with Ms. Bai and their children and charged with illegal entry and procuring forged documents. According to news reports, intelligence agencies had tracked calls made by Mr. Khan to Pakistan. The Hyderabad Police's Special Investigation Team, which is dealing with Mr. Khan's case, did not respond to the BBC's request for comment. It was when he was arrested that Ms. Bai finally discovered that Mr. Khan was a Christian from Pakistan. "I fought with the police, saying that he is from Punjab," she said. "Then they told me that there is a Punjab in Pakistan too, and he is from there." Ms. Bai says she was initially shocked to hear the truth, but that she has now made peace with it.
How does it matter now, she asks.
After Mr. Khan's arrest, she sought help from villagers and collected money for his legal expenses. A local court granted him bail in 2020 and a case on whether he should be deported is being heard. In February 2022, Mr. Khan was arrested again after the Telangana government issued an order to detain what they described as illegal migrants in the state.
The state's high court then ordered that he be released until his deportation case was decided.
Mr. Khan doesn't deny the charges against him, acknowledging that he is a Pakistani citizen who pretended to be an Indian. "I got what I deserved.
I have no complaints," he told the BBC. Now the couple is waiting for the court's verdict to find out if they can stay together, either in India or Pakistan.
"I just hope it all works out," Ms. Bai says.
Jammu, long wait for justice after India cough syrup deaths.
The last time 3-year-old Anirudh was captured on video, he lay listlessly on a hospital bed with wires attached to his hands. His mother is seen desperately trying to feed him, talking about the games he can play once he recovers.
3 days later, on January 10, 2020, the child died in the hospital.
For a fortnight before his death, he had suffered from diarrhea and vomiting, and was unable to urinate. His parents say these symptoms began after they gave him a cough syrup bought over the counter from a local chemist in Ramnagar, a small town in the northern Indian region of Jammu, where they live, to tackle a fever and chest infection. Why drugs made in India are sparking safety concerns. Doctors at the hospital said Anirudh's kidneys were damaged, and that levels of creatinine, a waste product normally filtered out by the kidneys, were very high in his body. His parents allege his death was caused by the cough syrup. Local drug control officials say the tests showed it contained high amounts of diethylene glycol, a toxic compound which could cause kidney failure and death if ingested. The child suffered a lot, his mother Veena Kumari told the BBC. He had difficulty consuming food, couldn't open his eyes, and his face and body were swollen. Between December 2019 and January 2020, at least 12 children, all under the age of 5, died in Ramnagar, allegedly after drinking the cough syrup.
Activists have said the number of deaths could be higher.
Parshottam Goyal, the owner of Digital Vision, which made the cough syrup, denies that their medicine was responsible for the deaths.
"Why would we kill someone's children? There are children in our houses too. We manufacture medicines, not poison," he told the BBC.
After child deaths in the Gambia and Uzbekistan were linked to Indian-made cough syrups, the Ramnagar tragedy came back into focus, giving the parents a chance to demand justice. Many of the parents say that their children experienced symptoms to those showed by children in the Gambia and Uzbekistan before they died. India is the world's largest exporter of generic drugs, meeting much of the medical needs of developing countries.
But the deaths in the Gambia and Uzbekistan made international headlines, raising questions about quality standards in India's pharmaceutical industry. Fury in the Gambia over India cough syrup deaths.
India firm's license cancelled after cough syrup deaths. Indian health activists say they have long tried to raise the alarm about lax manufacturing practices and regulatory oversight around the booming industry. In their book, The Truth Pill, health expert Dinesh Thakur and advocate Prashant Reddy write that India's first recorded case of diethylene glycol poisoning was in 1972, when 15 children died in the southern state of Tamil Nadu.
Since then, there have been mass poisoning events in several Indian states, they say, adding that the death tolls may be much higher as diethylene glycol poisoning is hard to diagnose. The authors say companies usually don't test either the raw materials or the final formulation before shipping it to the market. However, Indian regulators say that the deaths in Ramnagar are one-off instances. Based on aberration and a few batches, you cannot say the entire pharmaceutical industry of India is not doing well, says Udaya Bhaskar, Director General of the Pharmaceuticals Export Promotion Council of India. Indian regulators have said that the 4 cough syrups linked to child deaths in the Gambia complied with specifications when tested at home, which the World Health Organization has contested. It did, however, cancel the manufacturing license of the firm whose products allegedly led to fatalities in Uzbekistan. It has also made it compulsory for cough syrup makers to get samples tested before exporting their products. In the Ramnagar case, it took 2 years for police to file charges against 5 people, including the chemist who sold the syrup and 3 officials of Digital Vision. The case is being heard in a local court. A top district police official did not respond to the BBC's interview request. Digital Vision's manufacturing unit in Himachal Pradesh state was closed for 6 months in 2020, but was reopened after a court allowed it to operate. The parents say that they want action to be taken against those responsible for the deaths of their children. We want justice. We want the killers to be punished, says Murpha Baiwi, whose 3-month-old son, Ifan, died 10 days after consuming the syrup. The victims died for no reason. The manufacturer and drug control officers failed to perform their duty, alleges Sukesh Kajuria, an activist in Jammu, who was helping the parents in their fight. He adds that if government officials had done their jobs, there would have been no deaths in Gambia. But drug control officials insist they worked hard to deliver justice. The samples of the cough syrup collected in Ramnagar and sent for testing to a lab in Chandigarh had more than 34% diethylene glycol, Jammu and Kashmir drug controller Latika Kajuria told the BBC. The samples' findings were corroborated by another Kolkata-based lab, according to Ms. Kajuria. A team of experts led by pediatrician Bhavneet Bharati, who investigated the deaths, reached the same conclusion. The toxins primarily failed their kidneys. In some, multiple organs were affected: brain, liver, lungs. Some of them had to be put on a ventilator. Some died while others were left with major disabilities, Ms. Bharati said. One of the survivors is Pawan Kumar, who was 15 months old when he consumed the same cough syrup. He was in a hospital for 3 months before returning home, and is still being treated. His eyesight has diminished, listening capacity has significantly reduced, and he has high blood pressure, says Shambhu Ram, his father. The families want the government to financially assist with their children's treatment. This is the second in a 2-part series. You can read the first part here. Why India's soaring food inflation is a global problem. Erratic climate conditions, including the driest August in more than a century, have sent food prices spiraling above 11% in India, which is a major player in global agri-trade. Just as tomato prices begin cooling down, onions have gotten dearer by a quarter since June in the domestic market. And pulses, which go into making the humble dal, lentil soup, are now around 20% more expensive than at the beginning of the year. India's got a curry problem, some economists say, as the cost of a regular vegetarian meal jumped by a third in the month of July alone. With some key state elections this year and a big general election looming next summer, the Indian government has swung into action, unleashing a number of measures to tame food inflation. Following a ban on wheat exports in May 2022, India announced an abrupt stop to non-basmati white rice exports last month. More recently, the Finance Ministry imposed a duty of 40% on onions to discourage exports and improve domestic supplies. With sugar production expected to be lower this year, the likelihood of a ban on sugar exports has also increased, according to Rajni Sinha, chief economist at Carriage Group. The government could step up its response with further measures going ahead, analysts say. For instance, since the consecutive export restrictions on rice have not yet lowered domestic rice price inflation, the government could seek a more comprehensive ban, global brokerage Nomura said in a recent note. So does India, with its aggressive defense of domestic prices, run the risk of exporting food inflation to the world?
Purchase limits imposed bags or rice at an Indian grocery store in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on July 27, 2023. Shortages of non-basmati rice caused by rains and drought in rice-producing regions of India have sent prices soaring in the country.
Image source: Getty Images. Image caption:
Purchase limits were imposed on rice in a grocery store in Canada in July after India's export ban. The International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, believes it does, particularly with rice, sugar, and onions. Over the past decade, India has emerged as the world's largest exporter of rice. It holds a 40% market share and second largest exporter of sugar and onions. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization's FAO Rice Price Index jumped by 2.8% in July, its highest level since September 2011, driven mostly by price increases in the indica variety of rice whose exports India banned. This has amplified the upward pressure on the prices of rice from other regions, the FAO said. Since the ban was announced late last month, Thai rice prices have increased 20%. Joseph W. Glauber, senior research fellow at IFPRI, told the BBC. The impact of this, particularly on the world's poor, could be devastating, with food insecurity deteriorating in 18 hunger hotspots identified by the FAO and UN's World Food Programme. Rice is part of the staple diet, accounting for a large share of the caloric consumption of millions across Asia and Africa. And India is a major supplier to these markets. 42 countries in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa get 50% of their total imports from India, going up to 80% in some countries according to IFPRI, and its share cannot be easily substituted with imports from other large exporting countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, or Pakistan. Elevated global food prices could also have other implications in these countries, such as keeping food import bills high, leading to the use of precious foreign exchange, thus worsening balance of payment problems and contributing to inflation, says Upali Galkidi, senior economist at the Markets and Trade Division of the FAO. But the increase in global food prices cannot be blamed singularly on India's actions. The termination of the Black Sea Grain Initiative after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and extreme climate conditions across the world are other major contributing factors. The coming together of these market dynamics, however, has resulted in reversing the declining trend in international food prices observed since the middle of last year, Mr. Galkidi told the BBC. Global food prices are at historical highs despite a slowdown in many parts of the world, such as China. This is weighing on international food prices because of muted demand from these places. The World Bank expects its food price index to average lower in 2023 compared with 2022, driven by lower oil and grain prices. But analysts say the future price trajectory will depend on the impact of El Niño weather phenomena, something that could have far-reaching implications and put further pressure on food markets. Amid the uncertainty, calls for India to reverse its ban on the export of key commodities have come from various quarters, including the International Monetary Fund. Besides contributing to global food inflation, export bans have other negative externalities, such as denting India's reputation as a dependable supplier and preventing farmers from benefiting from remunerative prices globally, say analysts at Nomura. Trade restrictions could also exaggerate boom-bust price cycles. For instance, higher inflation impulses in 2015-16 led India to significantly increase imports, but normal monsoons and stronger domestic production in subsequent years led to a supply glut and prices crashed into deflationary territory through 2017-18. A sandwich without the usual slices of tomatoes is pictured at a Burger King outlet in New Delhi on August 17, 2023. Soaring vegetable prices after a bad harvest have prompted Burger King's Indian outlets to take tomatoes off their menu items, following in the footsteps of other fast food giants. Photo by Arun Sankar/AFP. Photo by Arun Sankar/AFP via Getty Images. Image source: Getty Images. Image caption: Some food outlets in India dropped tomatoes from their menu recently. Others, like Mr. Glauber, warned that importers may choose to find other more reliable partners if the benefits of diversifying suppliers outweigh price considerations. But according to the FAO, the most significant threat comes from the likelihood of more countries resorting to export restrictions, which would undermine trust in the global trading system. However, some say realpolitik and a resolve to increase food self-sufficiency will outweigh these other considerations in India, especially during a politically sensitive period. In the past, high prices of crops such as onions have led to electoral defeats in India. Add to that an already wobbly consumption recovery. Higher cost of food, which makes for a big chunk of an average Indian's expenses, can eat into discretionary incomes ahead of the upcoming festive season and derail this recovery further. India's central bank has already raised interest rates 6 times and can do little more to control food inflation given that it is a supply-side problem.
So the government is left with little ammunition apart from imposing trade restrictions. All countries right now are focused on controlling inflation in their own economies.
I would say India also has to take care of its own interests before it starts worrying about global inflation, says Ms. Sinha.
Agnipath scheme, the pain of Nepal's Gurkhas over Indian Army's new hiring plan. Published August 27.
Share. Armed personnel from Gorkha Rifles take part in a kukri, knife, dance as a part of India's 75th Independence Day celebrations at Gajaldobad barrage area some 32 kilometers from Siliguri on August 15, 2021.
Image source, Getty Images. Image caption. Nepal's famed Gurkha soldiers have served in the Indian Army for decades. By Anbarasan Ithirajan. BBC News. For decades, Nepal has allowed its ethnic Gurkha soldiers to join the Indian Army under a special agreement.
The practice came to an abrupt halt last year after India introduced a controversial new army hiring plan, straining ties between the two neighboring countries. The Gurkhas, famed for their ferocity and bravery, have fought several wars over the decades for both the Indian and British armies. They were first recruited by the British East India Company in 1815 following a peace deal with Nepal. After the end of colonial rule in 1947, a tripartite agreement between Nepal, India, and Britain allowed Delhi and London to continue to recruit Gurkhas to their military.
Is India planning to shrink its army?
But the arrangement with Delhi came to a halt last year after the Indian government announced Agnipath, a new hiring scheme for its soldiers.
Agnipath, or Path of Fire, hires soldiers on a fixed 4-year term.
Only a top-performing 25% will be retained for India's central security forces. The rest will be allowed to leave with a lump sum amount of nearly $15,000, £11,915, without pension or any other career benefits. The rules also apply to the Gurkha soldiers who have historically served for much longer terms in both the Indian and British armies. Nepalese Gurkha youths preparing for British Army recruitment in Kathmandu. Image source, Surendra Fuyal.
Image caption.
Previously, India on average recruited about 1,400 Nepali citizens into its Gurkha regiments annually.
Nepali officials say they were taken aback by Delhi's abrupt decision, as they were neither informed nor consulted on such a crucial change to the military recruitment program.
We have a policy that if there is any change made to a tripartite treaty, then it should be implemented through a political consensus, Nepalese Foreign Minister N.P. Sod told the BBC, adding that the recruitment of Gurkhas would be postponed for now. With most Nepalese political parties stoutly opposed to the change, it has become even more difficult for the current government to reach a consensus. Where India Army job dreams are made and broken. We are not going to accept the new plan. If India is ready to revert back to the older Gurkha recruitment process, then it can be resumed, Pradeep Kumar Jayawali, a senior leader of the main opposition Communist Party of Nepal, UML, told the BBC. Prior to the new scheme, India on average recruited about 1,400 Nepali citizens into its Gurkha regiments every year. There are about 35,000 Nepali Gurkhas currently serving in the Indian Army, including in the geopolitically sensitive region of Indian-administered Kashmir and the northeastern parts of the country. Delhi argues that the new hiring plan will reduce its army expenditure on ballooning salaries and pensions, which consume more than half of its defense budget. The short-term contracts will also lower the average age of its 1.3 million-strong armed forces.
Nepal's Foreign Minister NP Saad. Image source, Surendra Fuyal. Image caption. Nepal's Foreign Minister NP Saad says the new policy should have been implemented with political consensus.
For Nepal, this raises fears of a heightened risk from insurgents. There is a danger that a person with 4 years of military combat training can be recruited by any insurgent group in the country or even by foreign mercenaries, said Prem Singh Basniat, a Nepalese military historian and a retired army officer. Nepal suffered heavily due to a decade-long armed rebellion by Maoists that ended in 2006.
Thousands of people were killed during the unrest.
The country says it is not in a position to offer employment to all those who return from India. There have been calls in India as well to exempt the Nepali Gurkhas from the short-term contracts. Indian media facing a backlash in Nepal. Maj Gen, RTD, Ashok Mehta, who served in the Indian Gurkha Regiment, says the Agnipath scheme could complicate Delhi's ties with Kathmandu. The Indian government abrogated its responsibility in following diplomatic niceties, especially with a country like Nepal with which it claims special and unique relationship, he said. Indian officials have hinted that if Gurkhas from Nepal do not take up short-term contracts, then the jobs could be distributed to others in India for the time being. The BBC has reached out to India's foreign ministry for comment. Anish Thapa Magar, Nepalese young man who wants to join the Indian Army but in permanent commission. Image source, Surendra Fuyal. Image caption. Anish Thapa Magar wants to join the Indian Army but on permanent commission. Experts say the move could further alienate Kathmandu, which already feels aggrieved by recent Indian actions. Nepal was furious in 2019 when India published a map, including some of the areas claimed by Kathmandu in the western region, close to the border with China. The diplomatic wrangle escalated after Nepal also published its own map including those disputed areas. A few years before the map controversy, the ethnic Madhesi community in Nepal had blocked goods traffic from India as part of its 2015 protests for more rights. Though India denied it was behind the economic blockade, very few people in Nepal believed the denial. Nepal earthquake, how India and China vie for influence. In a playground outside Kathmandu, an instructor was making dozens of young men go through their paces as part of a training program for the forthcoming Gurkha recruitment to the British Army. Some of them, like Anish Thapa Magar, 19, were hoping to join the Indian military, as many of his relatives did.
The Agnipath program is of no use to us. After 4 years, we will return home without knowing what to do next.
That's why I am now practicing hard to get selected for the British Army, Mr. Magar says. Gurkha recruits pass out as they complete their military training at Heli's Barracks at the Infantry Training Centre on November 16, 2017 in Catterick, England. Image source, Getty Images. Image caption. Gurkha recruits complete their military training in England in November 2017. The Gurkhas have a strong bond with the Indian military, and Gurkha regiments have become part of the culture of the Nepali hill communities. There are about 120,000 Indian Gurkha veterans living in Nepal. Their pension and other benefits have contributed to the economy of the impoverished hill regions. Despite the stiff opposition, not everyone is resistant to the new hiring scheme. Nepalese Indian Gurkha veterans like Lakshmikant Pandey argue that the Agnipath scheme has its advantages and should not be rejected outright. The scheme offers a lump sum amount at the end of the tenure, and the Indian military experience will open up many other opportunities in Nepal and abroad, he said. The best option, he suggests, is to open up a dialogue with Delhi to get more concessions. In the meantime, the first batch of Indian soldiers who signed up for the Agnipath scheme have joined the army, after completing their training courses in the first week of August. India bridge collapse, at least 26 killed at construction site. Published August 23. Share. Media caption. Watch, scenes from the Sarang bridge collapse. By A.J. Goksadev and Catherine Armstrong. BBC News. At least 26 people have been killed and more are feared missing after a railway bridge under construction collapsed in northeastern India, officials said. The incident occurred near the town of Sairond, in the state of Mizoram. Up to 40 workers were at the site when part of the bridge collapsed, according to local media reports.
The cause of the incident is not yet clear, and the railway authority has opened an investigation. 3 people have so far been rescued. That includes an injured worker who had to be brought down from the top of one of the bridge's 100 high, 328 feet, pillars. The incident happened over the Kurung River, about 20 kilometers, 12 miles from the city of Asval, Mizoram's capital. All possible assistance is being given to those affected, said Prime Minister Narendra Modi's office in a statement. The government will pay some 200,000 rupees, £1,900, $2,400, to the next of kin of those killed, it added. The victims are all from West Bengal, according to railway officials. Words cannot express the depth of sorrow and sympathy for the families affected by this tragic event, said Mizoram's Home Minister Lalkamliana. The Kamrang Simui railway line will be 51 kilometers long and is due to be completed in December after work began nearly 2 years ago. Accidents on these kinds of construction sites are not uncommon in India.
In October last year, more than 140 people were killed when a pedestrian suspension bridge collapsed in India's western state of Gujarat. India bridge collapse, death toll rises to 141, many still missing.
Published October 31, 2022. Share. Media caption. Watch. People climb up collapsed Gujarat bridge to escape river.
By Merlin Thomas and Lawrence Peter.
BBC News.
At least 141 people died when a pedestrian suspension bridge collapsed in India's western state of Gujarat. A local official said most of those who had died were women, children, or elderly. The bridge in Morbi had been reopened just a week ago after repairs. There was overcrowding on the bridge at the time as people celebrated the Diwali festival, officials said.
The 230 meters (754 feet) bridge on the Makshu River was built during British rule in the 19th century.
The death toll is expected to rise further.
Live updates. Police, military and disaster response teams were deployed and the rescue effort is continuing.
More than 177 people have been rescued so far, officials said. Many children were enjoying holidays for Diwali and they came here as tourists, an eyewitness called Sukram told Reuters news agency.
All of them fell one on top of another. The bridge collapsed due to overloading.
Search at collapsed bridge, Morbi, October 30, 22.
Image source AFP. Image caption. Rescuers searched for survivors at night.
Videos on social media showed dozens clinging onto the wreckage as emergency teams attempted to rescue them. Some survivors clambered up the bridge's broken netting, and others managed to swim to the river banks. Reports said several hundred people were on the bridge when it collapsed at around 1840 India time, 1310 Greenwich Mean Time, on Sunday. A video shot before the collapse showed it packed with people and swaying and many gripping the netting on its sides. Gujarat is the home state of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has announced compensation for the families of victims. He said he was deeply saddened by the tragedy. Bridge collapsed over river. Image source, Bipin Tankarea. Image caption. A photograph of the wreckage. The authorities have promised a full investigation. Questions are being asked about whether safety checks were done before the bridge was reopened. It is a popular tourist attraction known locally as Joltopul, Swinging Bridge. Home Minister Harsh Sanghavi said a number of criminal cases had been registered over the incident.
Pratik Vasva was on the bridge at the time of the incident.
He told 24 Hours Gujarati language news channel how he had swum to the river bank. Several children fell into the river, he said, adding, I wanted to pull some of them along with me but they had drowned or got swept away. Videos showed scenes of chaos as onlookers on the river banks tried to rescue those trapped in the water as darkness fell.
Any story could be your last. India's crackdown on Kashmir press. Published September 1st. Share. Fahad Shah stands in a doorway. Image source, Mukhtar Zahor. Image caption.
Journalist Fahad Shah has been in jail for more than 18 months on terror charges.
By Yogita Limai. BBC News, Srinagar.
On April 5, 2022, a sense of joy pervaded the Sultan household in Badamaloo in central Srinagar. It was a sunny spring day in Indian-administered Kashmir, and after more than 3.5 years of visits to courts and police stations, they had received good news. Asif Sultan, a journalist, husband, father and son, had been granted bail. Relatives gathered waiting for him to return home.
When hours turned to days, Asif's family began to get anxious. On April 10, another charge was brought against Asif. He wasn't released and was moved to a jail outside Kashmir, making visits difficult. "We are devastated, but we'll keep fighting in court. Everyone knows he's innocent, so we will win eventually," his father Mohammad Sultan said. His 5-year-old granddaughter Ariba ran into the room and sat on his lap. She was 6 months old when her father was arrested. Asif Sultan, journalist and editor of a local monthly magazine, was arrested in 2018. Image source, Getty Images. Image caption.
Mohammad Sultan believes his son Asif, pictured here in 2018, was targeted for his work. Asif Sultan was first charged with aiding militancy in Muslim-majority Kashmir, which has seen an armed insurgency against Indian rule since 1989. He is charged under an anti-terror law called the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, in which it's extremely difficult to get bail. The second charge against him is under another controversial law, the Public Safety Act, PSA, which allows detention without charge for up to 2 years.
Mohammad Sultan rejects the accusations.
He believes Asif was targeted for his work, in particular an article about an anti-India militant that Asif wrote a month before he was arrested in August 2018. Asif is a professional reporter and he has been jailed for writing about the militancy.
"He has nothing to do with them, militants," says his father.
"They, the government, wanted to make an example out of him so that no one dares to cover topics the government doesn't approve of." The BBC has spent more than a year investigating accusations against the Indian government that it is running a sinister and systematic campaign to intimidate and silence the press in the region. "We had to meet journalists in secret, and they asked for their names to be hidden, fearing reprisals. Over many trips we spoke to more than 24 journalists, editors, reporters and photojournalists working independently as well as for regional and national outlets, all of whom see the government's actions as a warning to them."
Asif has now spent 5 years in jail.
Since 2017, at least 7 other Kashmiri journalists have been jailed. 4, including Asif, are still behind bars.
Fahad Shah. Image source, Umair Asif. Image caption.
Fahad Shah was arrested and accused of propagating terror under anti-terror laws in 2022. Fahad Shah, who edited a digital magazine, was arrested under anti-terror laws in February 2022, accused of propagating terror. A month before him, freelance journalist Sajjad Gul was arrested soon after he posted a video on social media of locals shouting anti-India slogans.
Sajjad was charged with criminal conspiracy.
Both have been re-arrested under new charges, each time they have been granted bail. The latest journalist arrest was in March this year. Irfan Maraj, whose work has appeared in international outlets, is accused of having links with terror funding. Many others from the press have had cases registered against them. The BBC has repeatedly asked the regional administration and police to respond to the allegations against them. "We have sought interviews and also sent emails with specific questions.
We have not received a reply." At the G20 meeting in Srinagar in May, we asked Manoj Sinha, the region's top administrator, about allegations of a media crackdown. He said the press enjoys absolute freedom.
"Journalists were detained and arrested on terror charges and for attempts to disrupt social harmony, not for journalism or for writing stories," he said. We have heard multiple accounts which belie the claims. It's very common for a journalist to be summoned by the police here. And dozens of instances where reporters have been detained over their news reports, one reporter told me. I started getting calls from the police about a story I did. They kept asking why I'd done it. Then I was questioned in person. They said they know everything about me and my family, which was very scary. I kept thinking about whether I would be arrested or harmed physically. More than 90% of the journalists I spoke to said they had been summoned by the police at least once, many of them multiple times over a story. Some said the tone of the police was polite. Others said they were met with anger and threats. We live in fear that any story could be our last story. And then you'd be in jail, one journalist said. Journalism is dead and buried in Kashmir, another reporter told me. Each of the journalists I spoke to said they had been called by the police numerous times over the past few years for routine background checks. I was witness to one such phone call. The journalist I was with got a call from the local police station. They put their phone on speaker. The police officer introduced himself and asked the journalist their name, address, and where they worked. When the journalist asked why these details were needed, the officer's tone remained friendly, but he proceeded to read out details of the journalist and their family, including what their parents do, where they live, where their siblings study and work, what degrees their siblings have, and the name of the business that one of their siblings runs. I asked the journalist how they felt after that call. It's worrying, they said. I'm thinking now, are they watching me? Are they watching my family? What triggered this phone call and what's going to happen next? Security forces in Srinagar. Image caption. Journalists in Srinagar told the BBC it is common for them to be summoned by police for questioning. Other journalists said they have been asked even more personal details, including what property they own, what bank accounts they have, what their religious and political beliefs are. Journalists in Kashmir are being treated like criminals. We're labeled as anti-nationals, terror sympathizers, and pro-Pakistan reporters. They don't understand that it's our job to reflect all sides, one journalist said. All of the Kashmir region is disputed by India and Pakistan, and both countries as well as China control parts of it. Militant groups operating in Indian-administered Kashmir are based in Pakistan and are long believed to have the support of Pakistan's intelligence services, an allegation Islamabad firmly rejects. There have also long been accusations of human rights violations by Indian security forces in Kashmir, which have fueled anger against Indian rule and support for pro-Pakistan insurgent groups in some parts of the region. Journalists say the Indian government is trying to shut down reporting related to separatist movements and militant groups, but also any coverage critical of the security forces or the administration, even on day-to-day civic issues. Most journalists I spoke to said they began to feel more scrutiny after Asif Sultan's arrest in 2018, and things have become drastically more difficult since August 2019. That's when India revoked the region's special status and divided the country's only Muslim-majority state into two territories which are now controlled by the national government led by the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP. The Supreme Court of India is currently hearing a case about the legality of these moves. For 5 years now, there has been no elected regional government here. And when the Chief Justice asked the government this week when elections would be held, noting that restoration of democracy is important, the government said it could not give an exact timeline. Because there's no elected representative we can approach, the government gets away with acting with impunity, a journalist said. At least 4 Kashmiri journalists have made public that they were stopped from flying out of India, their boarding passes stamped cancelled by immigration authorities with no reasons given. One is a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer who couldn't attend the awards ceremony. The BBC has learnt that the list of Kashmiri journalists not allowed to leave India has dozens of names, but it's not been made public. We asked the police about the legal basis for these lookout circulars, as they are referred to in official parlance, and have not received a reply. Journalists have also had fresh passports withheld when they applied to renew expired passports. In recent weeks, passports previously issued to some journalists have also been cancelled.
Communication from the government says the journalists are considered a security threat to India. We feel choked and suffocated, one journalist said. All of us are self-censoring. I read my report once as a journalist, then I read it like a policeman would and I start deleting things and watering it down. There's hardly any journalism being done, it's mostly just PR for the government. Editors have told us they often get directions from the administration on what to cover and what to leave out. They have been instructed to use the word terrorist instead of militant when referring to armed insurgents. Regional media outlets depend heavily on government advertising, and many have been threatened with the withdrawal of these funds if they don't fall in line. I hate what I do every day, but what about the people I employ? What happens to them if I shut down, one editor said. What's happened to journalism here is evident when you read the local press. I spent 3 days comparing dozens of papers published in Kashmir with the daily government press release. Nearly all had the release on their front pages, some had edited it, others carried it verbatim. The rest of the front pages were covered with statements from the government or security forces. There were many feature stories, but barely any journalism holding the government to account. In June, allegations surfaced of Indian Army personnel entering a mosque in Pulwama in southern Kashmir and shouting Jai Shri Ram, Hail Lord Ram, a Hindu chant. In normal circumstances, journalists from all outlets would have been in Pulwama speaking to all sides on the ground to verify details and filing reports. The day after, only a handful of papers carried the story, nearly all reporting it through a quote from regional politician Mehbooba Mufti, who called for an investigation. Over the next few days, more papers carried it, but only as a story about the Indian Army investigating the incident. There was barely any on-the-ground reporting. While most journalists I spoke to said they fear reprisals by the state, some also said they feel under threat from militants. There have been instances of militant groups posting statements on their websites threatening journalists. I spoke to one journalist who received a threat. A journalist's life in Kashmir is like walking on a razor's edge. You live in fear all the time, he said. What are you afraid of? I asked. Of a bullet coming at me. When I see a motorcycle stop next to me, I feel terrified that someone is going to pull out a gun and shoot me, and that no one will ever find out who did it, he said. In 2018, leading editor Shurjat Bukhari was shot dead outside his Srinagar office, police say by militants. 5 years later, the trial into his killing is yet to begin. In a region ridden by conflict, one space where journalists could meet freely, discuss stories and share their anxieties was the Kashmir Press Club in central Srinagar. It was a refuge especially for independent journalists who don't have offices. But it wasn't just that. It was also the main body in the region that defended the rights and freedom of the press. Press Club after it was converted into a police office. Image caption: the former Kashmir Press Club in central Srinagar, now repurposed as a police office. Last year, the government shut it down. The complex I've visited so often to get invaluable local insight into stories, now houses a police office. Journalists say they have nowhere to turn to when they feel threatened. Foreign journalists need Ministry of Home Affairs permission to visit Kashmir, and they are rarely given it. The G20 event in May was the first time in the past few years foreign journalists had been allowed to visit Srinagar, but the access was extremely controlled, defining which areas they could visit and what they could cover. Over the past decade, all of India has witnessed a serious decline in press freedom, which is reflected in global rankings, cases against journalists and raids against media houses. But the degree of the decline in Kashmir is extreme. We have found evidence that press freedom has been all but eroded here. In the Sultan household, a copy of Kashmir Narrator, the magazine Asif Sultan used to write for, takes pride of place on a shelf in the living room. His father opened the well-thumbed magazine and pointed to Asif's photo in a byline. Muhammad asked his granddaughter who the person in the picture was. My papa. He is in jail, Ariba replied. Muhammad hopes Asif is released before Ariba gets to an age where she registers what has happened to her father. I'm getting old, he said. But I'm trying to be both a father and grandfather to her. How long can I do this for?
Journalists across the globe are coming under unprecedented attacks from governments, media watchdog Reporters Without Borders, RSF, has warned. In its annual report, the RSF said authorities were becoming more aggressive towards reporters. And it warned that public hostility towards the press was increasing as a result of fake news and disinformation. According to the RSF, 55 journalists and 4 media workers were killed at work in 2022.
The report warned that the environment for journalism was bad in an unprecedented 7 out of 10 countries.
Among those that fell on the rankings was India, the world's largest democracy, that is now placed at 161 out of 180 countries. The report found that many journalists who were critical of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his government were subjected to harassment by his supporters. In February 2023, the BBC's Delhi offices were raided by income tax officials 1 week after the broadcaster aired a documentary in the UK critical of Mr. Modi. And the report criticized the concentration of media ownership in the country, which it said was broadly controlled by allies of Mr. Modi, creating a politically partisan media landscape. The state of press freedom was found to be very serious in an unprecedented 31 different countries, including Turkey, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Turkey fell to 165th place in the rankings, with the report noting that many journalists have been persecuted in the lead-up to elections, slated to take place on May 14. The US and the UK also fell slightly, with the RSF criticizing the arrest of British reporters covering protests, a lack of media ownership, pluralism, and legislative proposals with worrying implications for journalism. In addition to challenges from authorities, the report also said the digital landscape was worsening conditions for journalists. The unprecedented ability to tamper with content is being used to undermine those who embody quality journalism and weaken journalism itself, it warned. It said artificial intelligence's ability to create what appears like journalism meant the principles of rigor and reliability were easily bypassed. The RSF also referenced Elon Musk's recent decision to purchase Twitter, and said his changes to the platform, including paid for verification, was like quicksand for journalism. European countries led the rankings, with East Timor being the only country outside the EU placing in the top 10. Nordic countries performed well in the rankings, with Norway coming first and receiving praise for its vibrant and robust media landscape. It was followed by Denmark in third, Sweden in fourth, and Finland in fifth.
Ireland, the Netherlands, Lithuania, Estonia, and Portugal rounded out the top 10.
Speaking ahead of World Press Freedom Day, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that all our freedom depends on press freedom. Similarly to the RSF, he said disinformation threatened the truth as it blurred the lines between fact and fiction, between science and conspiracy. UNESCO awarded the 2023 World Press Freedom Prize to 3 Iranian women, 2 journalists, and a human rights activist who have been imprisoned. Secretive internet vigilantes have made it their mission to fight climate change denial on Twitter. But, as a vicious information war rages online, do they risk becoming the very trolls they claim to be targeting? I meet Maria and Arthur at the top of a hill overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, in a small coastal town in Spain. They ask me not to reveal their real names or their exact whereabouts. Over the years, they have made countless enemies on the internet, and they believe stepping out of the shadows could prove dangerous. For you to be able to do your work, and not be scared of the consequences, you really have to fly under the radar, Maria tells me. Maria, one of the ninjas, sits at her desk while wearing a paper mask. Image caption. Maria says she has spent thousands of hours reporting tweets from climate deniers. In 2019, she helped set up Team Ninja Troll Hunters, a group of 25 people from around the world who came together to fight climate change denial on Twitter. For me, it was a necessity to show that many things that are being tweeted are wrong, Maria says. Like some of her fellow vigilantes, she has a background in science, which comes in handy when looking through complex research. But, with her blue Snoopy t-shirt, Maria does not immediately strike me as a ninja, and neither does her softly spoken partner, Arthur, whom she recruited into the group. We fought many battles together and we also had a lot of fun, he says. When the group first came together in 2019, part of its time was spent fact-checking false or misleading claims they found on Twitter. Screenshot of a tweet falsely claiming there is no relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature.
Image caption. False claims like this one often attract the group's attention. The ninjas spotted claims going viral and responded to them with links to factual information, academic papers, or scientific reports. But after a couple of months, you realize you don't make an impact because, for most of these people, facts are irrelevant, Maria says. How to talk to a climate denier. A really simple guide to climate change. It was time to come up with new tactics.
The ninjas began keeping tabs on prominent Twitter accounts which disputed the basic science of climate change. Whenever those users tweeted something which broke the platform's rules, they would report them. Climate change denial is not forbidden on Twitter, but some other types of content are, like threats, harassment, or hate speech. Until November last year, posting misleading claims about COVID-19 could also lead to tweets being removed or accounts being suspended. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether they get suspended because of COVID-19 misinformation or Nazi symbols, Maria tells me.
When they're gone, they're gone. Thousands of hours of slow, painstaking work paid off, or so the ninjas like to believe.
They claim that, as a result of their actions, about 600 Twitter accounts promoting climate change denial were suspended.
I cannot independently verify this claim.
But I have seen links to hundreds of offending tweets that the ninjas reported, as well as a detailed list of suspended accounts. One of those accounts was Mike's. He is an Australian engineer with more than 23,000 followers on Twitter, many of whom believe in conspiracy theories. In April last year, his account was permanently suspended from Twitter after posting an unfounded claim about COVID vaccines. Up until that point, the ninjas had been keeping watch on his feed, reporting dozens of his tweets. In a private forum, they added Mike's handle to their list of claimed scalps.
I'm not surprised in the slightest, Mike says.
Over the years, he claims to have been repeatedly targeted by groups like this one, which he accuses of trolling users like him. One of the ninjas works on his computer, with a paper mask down on his desk.
Image caption. The ninjas' identities are a well-kept secret.
The ninjas share a set of rules laid out in a document called the Resistor's Guide to Effective Troll Hunting. In it, members are advised not to engage with their targets. And yet, by their own admission, each member of the group has their own way of operating. Maria insists she always played by the rules and that she knew where the line was. But Arthur's methods led to him getting temporarily suspended from Twitter a couple of times.
When I engaged climate change deniers, I noticed some of them got agitated.
So I continued to do it, until the point they showed harassing behavior against me, which is not allowed, he told me.
Then you can get rid of them.
I suggest to Arthur that his behavior may not be dissimilar to that of an online troll. You could say that, because it is partially true, he replies. But I point out to him that, by provoking his targets into crossing a line, he could be causing real-world harm. I can't see any real-world damage worse than what they are doing, he says.
When they are trying to convince people climate change is a myth, they are inflicting damage upon all of us.
An image of new Twitter owner Elon Musk is seen surrounded by Twitter logo.
Image source, Getty Images. Image caption. Since Elon Musk took over Twitter, thousands of previously suspended accounts have been reinstated. But the ninjas' efforts have been somewhat hampered by Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. Last November, the billionaire announced the platform would reinstate thousands of previously suspended accounts. Mike's account was among them.
The haters and conspiracy theorists back on Twitter.
How Elon Musk's tweets unleashed a wave of hate.
That was a slap in the face, Maria says. If Twitter decided that these people should be suspended, there was a good reason for it. Twitter did not respond to requests for comment. Maria and Arthur have now left Twitter, but other members of the group have stayed there.
Their online battle continues.
I have spoken to several of the group's current members, and they described a recent uptick in climate misinformation circulating on Twitter. For Arthur, this proves just how relevant the ninjas continue to be. If just a fraction of regular people would do what we did, we would be much louder than all deniers together. You can listen to Twitter Ninjas Against Climate Denial on BBC Sounds.